we'll begin with our third session. The chair and moderator for the session would be Commodore V. Venugopal, Indian Navy retired. The topic for the session is Sri Lanka, international politics and socio-economic perspective. Oh, sorry. Sri Lanka, internal politics, socio-economic perspective. Duration for the session will include the Q&A, which will be the comments after the presentation of Ms. Sapna. I would request the dignified participants to hold on to their questions till the chair indicates the inception of Q&A. For Q&A, we may also include the questions that are presented in our chat box of our YouTube channel. Sir, now I request you to please begin the proceedings of the session. Over to you, sir.
Just to add on, kindly write your questions in a piece of paper and send it across at the end of the session, so that the panelist knows exactly what you're asking. So as Mondal had mentioned, that session 3 is covering to basically 3 topics: Sri Lankan economic crisis and implications for India, Sri Lanka political fault line and future scenario, and role of Buddhist Sangha in Sri Lanka politics. We have very eminent speakers covering each of the topic. I will rather not steal the thunder, but I'll just give a brief introduction. Dr. Smriti Patnaik, she's a research fellow at the Manohar Parihar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, holds a PhD degree in South Asian Studies from the School of International Studies, JNU, and specialized on India's neighborhood policy and politics in South Asia. Dr. Patnaik has published more than 100 research articles and chapters on South Asia. She is the author of Elite Perception in Foreign Policy, a role of print media and in influencing Indo-Pak relations, and has edited 2 books, South Asia, Envisioning a Regional Future, India-Bangladesh Relations, Historical Imperative and Future Direction, 2012. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, C3S, and to all of you for this invitation to Chennai. This is the first time I have come to C3S on a conference on Sri Lanka. So basically, what I am going to do is that much has been spoken about Sri Lanka's economic crisis since the morning. Because if we are speaking about the debt restructuring, if we are speaking about how Sri Lanka is going to pay back the money which it has taken from various creditors internationally, so therefore it's not surprising that most of the presentation has focused on this economic crisis. So basically what I will do is that the genesis of the economic crisis, how it happened. It is not that it happened in 2022, it has been a process which has been in making for quite some time. So in a sense, even if one can speak about, just 1 second. So if one can speak about this particular crisis, one saw the sign in 2021, but unfortunately the government, especially the Sri Lankan Central Board of Central Bank, very interestingly said, I was a little surprised by this particular picture which was provided by the Central Bank in December 22nd, 2021, which is available in their website, which says that the government is also in the process of securing government-to-government financing, syndicated loans, as well as loans from multilateral organizations. In addition, the expected foreign exchange facilities that were negotiated during the high-level visits abroad made by authorities are also progressing well. I'm saying that this is the report which is coming in December 2021. when the crisis almost started, in March. Further, the interventions made by the central bank on several facets of foreign exchange market, such as incentive scheme introduced for the worker remittance and the repatriation and conversion requirements on account of export proceeds, will improve the liquidity in the domestic market, thereby enabling the central bank to build up official reserves further. With the recent rise in departures for foreign employment and exponential growth observed in tourist arrivals, the external sector is expected to recover well in the period ahead, and the pressure observed at present are expected to moderate with increased inflow to the economy. The government and the central bank remain confident that these expected inflows will materialize and the reserve position will remain at a comfortable level throughout the year 2022. So in a sense, even if the government knew that this is the crisis which is almost unfolding, the government really did not provide the kind of picture which the people of Sri Lanka should have known. So therefore, it is not surprising in April when the government said that it is bankrupt, it can't pay more than 50 billion US dollar in external loan. So people, at that point of time, the sign of distress were already there in terms of the fuel, the electricity cut, people were asked not to come to the schools, not to send their children to the school because there was no fuel crisis, to join online classes because they can't take the public transport. So in a sense, it started unfolding, impacting on common people's life. Because they did not remain confined to the government policies, the reforms and other things, but it started impacting on general people's life. Now, the question is that how did it come about? I will just very quickly go to a particular slide, not this one. This is basically the market borrowing, and many of the people have already spoken about this particular slide, the 10% which Sri Lanka owe both to Japan and China. And there has been a lot of argument which is made by the Chinese saying that it only, Sri Lanka only owes 10%, but this 10% is not returning in terms of the economic benefit. So therefore, the 10% if you're investing and if you're not getting returns, obviously that adds to the debt, even if it is 10%. This is basically, I would say it's basically tax populism, which the Sri Lankan government had taken steps. For example, the value-added tax, which previously was 15%, was revised to 8% after 2019 election. Similarly, the VAT on condominium property, which is basically, many of the rich people buy that. So from 28%, it came down to 14%. From tax-free threshold over the turnover, if you're having a particular kind of turnover, the kind of VAT you need to pay, which was earlier rupees 1 million, that was the threshold you have to pay the VAT, was increased to rupees 25 million. Now, when you look at various tax which was abolished, in the nation building tax of 2%, which is basically the government has levied for infrastructure development in the country, the debit tax imposed on banks, capital gain tax, debt service tax, withholding tax on interest, and pay as you earn tax. So all of these were abolished. As a result, cumulatively, all these steps in fact impacted, which basically in terms of the economic terms, it has been calculated, it is 2% of the GDP. The government lost revenues. So on one hand, you have COVID, so the tourist figure had gone down. On the other hand, you also had the tax reduction. So therefore, basically Sri Lanka's import, it imports much more than what it exports outside. But this particular import, as well as the budget financing, which was basically made up from the tourism sector, as well as from the garment sector, and the remittances which Sri Lankan generally sent to the country. So when all these factors dried down because of the COVID, and in addition, you also have the tax reduction, so obviously the revenue completely dried up. So you're almost living in borrowing. There is no money which is coming to the government account. All this impacted on the crisis which unfolded around April. Now look at the worker remittances. I have only given the comparative figure of 2021, 2022. If you look at the figure, in fact, if you look at 2019 was much better, 2020 it came down, the tourism figure was much less. But it has started looking up in 2021, but in 2022 it just again came down because of the political crisis. Because like suppose if you are speaking of the economic recovery, how can you make economic recovery when tourism, your dependency is on tourism, your dependency is on remittances, and because of political turmoil, no tourists are coming inside. So obviously, you are not, the expected revenue which you are supposed to get, you are not getting. Similarly, the dollar price which was fluctuating in Sri Lanka, so there was no stability in the dollar price. So many of the workers who could have sent the remittances held back. So the, like for example, when basically the businessman, when they wanted to open the letter of credit, they didn't have enough money to open the letter of credit because, again, the fluctuation of dollar price, the government doesn't have sufficient dollar even to finance such kind of businesses. This is basically tourism figure 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. So in 2020, look at 2019 figure. So it reduced both due to the Easter bombing crisis, as well as the COVID. But it has started looking up. So this is one place where I see the tourism has really looked up. Now very quickly, in terms of, apart from these key figures, what also impacted on the food crisis is the government's unfortunate decision to, not to go for chemical fertilizer and ask basically the farmers to, to depend on the organic fertilizer. So in a sense, many people say that this was done just to preserve the foreign reserves because you don't have reserve to buy chemical fertilizer. So what you do is that you tell the farmers, let us get into organic. And there is a process you have to go, you have to introduce the organic farming. You can't do it overnight and suddenly not having any kind of chemical fertilizer. So as a result, basically the rice and other products which Sri Lanka used to produce earlier, that also reduced. So in a sense, internally you also started having a major food crisis. So therefore it is not surprising that people came out on the street because the impact was such. Everybody got impacted in this particular crisis. Then just few points. The government should have gone to IMF much earlier than when it went to the IMF. And unfortunately, because when you have foreign currency reserve, you can basically negotiate with the IMF from a position of strength. And you really do not have any money, and when you go to the IMF, obviously the IMF will ask that, okay, we'll provide you money, so how are you going to pay us back, which is very, very natural. And I find it very, very interesting. The Chinese position on this particular thing kept on changing. I just very quickly just read out a particular statement. This is the statement which came in May, but it changed in June and July regarding Sri Lanka's decision to go to IMF. The Chinese embassy in Sri Lanka said, China has done its best to help Sri Lanka not to default, but sadly they went to IMF and decided to default. Debt restructuring definitely will have an impact on future bilateral loans. Countries that colonize Sri Lanka have more obligations to help at this juncture. This is the Chinese statement, which came in April, but slowly they have become a little lenient, and now they're saying that they will be part of the debt restructuring. But as we know, like, for example, Mr. President Vikramasinghe's statement that, they will also speak to China, but it is very clear that China has not agreed for as many of the discussants already have spoken about it, because it will have a larger global impact in terms of the kind of loan which China has provided to other countries. So that will be a major challenge. I'll just very quickly, I don't know how much time I have, very quickly. Okay, very quickly, I will just say that, the 53.1% of the GDP is basically in Sri Lankan currency, the loan which Sri Lanka has to pay. 48.2% is in foreign currency, out of which 11% is by multilateral creditors, 6.9 is bilateral, which includes Japan 4.4%, India 1%, Korea 0.5%, Germany and France 0.3 each. China is 6.9% of GDP. So all these countries together 6.9 and China alone 6.9. This is government to government loan which the government has provided. Now what is the impact on India very quickly? Obviously many of the Indian traders who are trading with Sri Lanka are extremely reluctant to basically to do trade because they're not very sure whether the Sri Lankan will be able to pay back the money if they're going to trade. So there is this apprehension which exists. Of course, people also have emphasized that around 4 billion assistance which India has provided, soft loan. Somebody was speaking about the percentage of the loan which Chinese have given. It's commercial debts, nearly 7%. This is an estimate which is made by the Sri Lankan themselves. But India's line of credit has been nearly 1% or little less than that because it is mostly into the social sector. So if you compare India and China in terms of the investment, China's investment is big commercial projects, whereas Indian investment is much more in the social and infrastructure sector. So therefore, one can make very clear distinction regarding the priorities of the two countries as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. So therefore, obviously, this is something which will have impact on India. India wants to localize this economic crisis by providing aid so that it doesn't impact India in terms of the refugee crisis or anything, and any instability in Sri Lanka will have an impact on India's own security and stability. Because I always believe that India has always preferred stability in the neighborhood. So therefore, many people, when they argue that it is democracy which is India's one of the prime consideration in the neighborhood, I would say that it has been the stability. So it doesn't matter the form of the government. It has to be a little representative, broad-based, so that you are taking people's concern into account, but also at the same time you are having stability. So if we're emphasizing on stability, so obviously Sri Lanka's economic recovery, in whatever way India can help them to recover, will really help India in long run. I'll end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for an excellent presentation and lucidly explained also with good illustrations giving the data. Now can I call upon Dr. Ashok Ponderfur to come up on the podium. I'll just make a brief introduction. Assistant Professor, Madras Christian College. Dr. Ponderfur's main areas of research and teaching are international relations, foreign policy, South Asia, Asia Pacific, human rights, refugees, and mixed migration. Prior to joining MCC, he worked for over 10 years in various positions, including teaching, research fellow, Department of Politics and Public Administration, University of Madras, and researcher at Center for Asia Studies, the Chennai chapter, ORF. He recently published a book on Huxer on India's Sri Lanka policy. His edited works include recent developments in Myanmar, its implications for India, and refugee situation in India today. Over to you, Dr. Ponderfur.
Sorry. Before I start, the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my views on this topic, political fault lines and future scenario. Sorry. Definitely, I should be away. All right, I hope it's audible. And in 1960s, you know, the wise public policies of then successive governments had made Sri Lanka a model for South Asian development. Lee Kuan Yew in 1964 said he hoped this country would become like Sri Lanka someday. If only he was alive today, he would affirm that Singapore should never become like Sri Lanka. Why did Sri Lanka come to this kind of a bad state? Being in one or other kind of emergency is not new for this island. Decades of mismanagement by successive Sri Lankan governments since 1970s resulted in the chaotic situation that they are in today. The protracted ethnic conflict was always blamed for being such a sad state. Until 2009, the Sri Lankan government always had a reason to little invest in development program. Patronization of ethnic conflict also worked well in the eyes of the international community, where the international community was more than happy to provide economic support to sustain ethnic conflict under the banner of conflict resolution. However, this scenario changed in 2009 when the ethnic conflict ended and Rajapaksa government was able to showcase its victory against LTTE as a victory in the war on terror. In fact, he said he was the first ruler to decimate a terrorist organization, and they won it. This glory would have sustained for long had Rajapaksa not stopped himself from speaking in Tamil to the nation, but in the true spirit invested resources for the development of the whole country, not just few pockets. Wartime politics is different from peacetime politics. An important lesson in politics is that there should always be an opposition or keep an enemy in vicinity to sustain oneself in power. Unfortunately, the glorious Rajapaksa family, though known for their vicious politics, never understood the art of governance. Although Rajapaksa once lost to Sirisena and Ranil, it was only a short passage of time. Moreover, Ranil was not a worthy, tall leader he was not able to sustain or retain power for not more than 5 years. With a divided opposition, the Rajapaksa brothers received another chance to come to power in 2019. Their ill-conceived populist policies, which would have worked during wartime, could not sustain this time. Of course, COVID and external debts are blamed for the current crisis. However, when one looks deep within, it is only a matter of time before people's agitation against the leadership happened. Other speakers have time and again said it was brooding up even well before 2019. Are the Rajapaksas only to be blamed? What about former President Maithripala Sirisena and Ranil Wickremesinghe's government from 2015 to 2019? Few years ago, Professor Hariharan, the representative of Tamil diaspora, and we were trying to get investment into north and east of Sri Lanka. We had identified partners willing to invest, but the honors of getting government approval was on us. Each time we went to the government for approval, they would give notional consent and never actual permission. When asked for a reason, they always mentioned that Rajapaksa's people occupied all bureaucratic positions and it took time to get clearance. Each time people wanted to invest in north and east, it was a non-starter. Ours was just one example. There were numerous such cases. Was Sirisena-Ranil combination any better than the Rajapaksas? The answer is resounding no. Failure of policies. Everybody has been all the speakers since morning. They've been saying this. The 5 things: the Easter attack of 2019, the impact of COVID and tourism, tourism and other service sectors, immediate ban on import of chemical fertilizers, massive tax cuts, mounting external debts. All of this are spoken enough. Hence, I will not go into this. At the same time, my concern is that recovery is a slow process. The current Ranil government does not have enough legitimacy to sort out these matters. His dependence on Rajapaksa is imminent, and despite his Western linkage, I do not see any difference in the political system. His response to protesters during the last few days shows that he is far more autocratic than Rajapaksa is. With such an attitude, he can only remain in power by using excessive force on the people. The real Ranil is a tie and suit wearing, international-minded, business-friendly liberal who had repeatedly failed to connect with the rural voters. For him, Colombo elite is his constituency. On the other hand, the protesters are from the rural and non-elite background. In brutally breaking down the main protest site in front of presidential office, less than 24 hours from his official swearing in, he sent a message to long-time backers and protesters. He will not compromise on the upper class interest. In this scenario, would he last the remaining period? Is in the government? We need to wait and watch. On the economic issue, the Sri Lanka is a stark example of neo-colonialism. Developed states use their financial status to occupy developing countries. In their urge to get more money, the developing states try to get loans, other speakers have mentioned about it, wherever possible. Little do they understand that such investments would bring in burden soon. Belt and Road Initiative is one such trap. Most of our neighbors are already in this deep crisis. Is there a way out? Unfortunately, there's little light at the end of the road. I'll just stop with this 5 important things that the government can do. Some of it is already mentioned, but I'll just stop with the 5 issues. First is, of course, you're talking about negotiating $3.5 billion with IMF program. According to the newspaper yesterday, the governor of the central bank is likely to visit, and he's saying he'll be able to get 3.5 billion. What his main concern is, getting money, he'll get it, but it should be for 5 years. It should go on for 5 years. If the government, if the IMF says they can't extend it for 5 years, then that is an issue that he's got. Hopefully, he'll be able to get it. Second is, we've been talking about debt restructuring with BRI. Again, the papers say that Ranil is visiting Japan first in the next month, followed by China. How is he trying to restructure the whole loan? He's asking China not to charge him interest for next 6 months. Right? If they can extend it for next 6 months, then there's some hope that he'll be able to start repaying in the next few years. Then of course, you have what you call as they're talking in terms of raising taxes. It is already there. But the problem in Sri Lanka now is there is disproportionate rise of taxes. Ordinary people, they're already paying extra amount for electricity bill. Now, if the taxes are going to increase, it's going to put enormous burden on the ordinary people. Will they be able to sustain it? It's another question. Government has said that they will not increase the electricity charges, but there are also reports saying that whatever they've increased is not enough. They are trying to raise it even further. How is the government going to do it? Will the protesters accept it? Will the public at large accept it? We still do not know. Hasita mentioned about the sale of Sri Lankan Airlines, petroleum, Ceylon Petroleum, as well as the telecommunication. Unfortunately, all 3 are now not so in good shape. Recently, when they took the matters for discussion, there are some reservations from the international actors. Will they be really able to sell it? We'll have to wait and watch. Another way of getting money is to allow diaspora to come in. Government has said they will delist the Tamil diaspora group so that they can come and invest. Will they have confidence and will they come and invest in Sri Lanka? There's no signs. I've had some discussions in the last few days. They say unless there is some clarity on what Ranil is going to do, they will not believe Ranil because they already burnt their fingers earlier. Now they don't want to do it again. Right? The last one is, when it comes to economic potential, Sri Lanka is too dependent on tea and, of course, tourism. I think it is time they expand. Their service sector should expand. If it doesn't expand, then it will take another 5 to almost a decade for them to solve the crisis. With that, I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ponderfur, for an excellent presentation. Very valid points raised. Thank you so much. Now I'll call upon Sapna Elsa Abraham from C3S to talk. A brief introduction of Sapna. It's very encouraging to see a young research officer coming and making a presentation here. Ladies and gentlemen, I think she deserves a good clap for that. Sapna is a research officer at the Chennai Center for China Studies. She completed a bachelor's in history, economics, and political science from Christ and a master's degree in international relations from University of Madras. Her research work includes Indian naval diplomacy and the influence of Portuguese rule on Malayalam language. She has also published an issue brief titled The Arctic and Great Power Competition. Over to you, Sapna.
Sir. Commodore R.S Vasan, Director General C3S, distinguished speakers, esteemed panelists, friends. I am privileged and honored to be able to present here at the August gathering. I would like to extend my thanks to Commodore R.S Vasan and Team C3S for giving me an opportunity to speak here. And I would also like to thank my Senior Research Officer, Mr. Balasubramanian C, for helping me with this topic and encouraging me to speak in this conference. So my topic for discussion is, as you can see, role of Buddhist Sangha in Sri Lankan politics. So the Buddhism is the main religion followed by majority of Sri Lankans. In an international religious freedom report that was published in 2012, 70.2% of Sri Lankans were following Buddhism. And they were following the Theravada Buddhism, which is one of the oldest schools of Buddhism. So this religion, Buddhism, it plays a very major role and a vital role in the social and the political aspects of the society in Sri Lanka. The Buddhist Sanghas are the monastic communities that are present in Sri Lanka. Buddhism being part of the political side in Sri Lanka, they have been supporting parties contesting elections in parliament, and they have also been directly and indirectly elected to the parliament by the people. With the amount of influence the Sangha possesses over the state affairs, Buddhist Sangha can be viewed as a powerful pressure group. Now, to understand the role of Buddhist Sangha, we need to, I have divided the entire presentation into 3 sections. That is, one is the history of Buddhism. Second is the pre-colonial, colonial Sri Lanka, and also the third one is the post-colonial, and the fourth one, I will speak about the present influence of the Buddhist Sanghas. Now, coming into the history of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, it is very important to understand the history of Buddhism in Sri Lanka to understand the relation that the state and the clergy holds. Historically, we get an idea of the relations through various chronicles that are present. One such important text is the Mahavamsha, which means the Great Chronicle. Buddhism is believed to have reached Sri Lanka in 250 BCE and was brought to Sri Lanka by Mahinda, the son of Ashoka. Now, to understand more about this, how the Buddhist Sangha became very powerful, we should understand the social order that was present. So the social order, you can see it was the king first, then followed by Sanghas and the people. The Sanghas ensured that the religious purity and political legitimacy to the king, and the king provided economic support and monitored the purity of the Sanghas. And the people looked up to the Sanghas and the rulers for the guidance and social order. So there was a reciprocal relation between the two sections. So it should be kept in mind that this influence of religion in the social and the state affairs of a country is not a very unique situation to only Sri Lanka, but through history we all have studied that this has always been in the case from the ancient time till the present time in every part of the world. Coming to the next phase is the colonial Sri Lanka. First, the Portuguese arrived, then the Dutch, and then the British. The role that the Buddhism and the power that the Buddhist Sangha and Buddhism had in the society and the political sphere in Sri Lanka diminished when the colonial powers came to Sri Lanka. Because especially after British came into power, in the beginning they supported the Sanghas to get the support from the people, but later on they were more interested in spreading Christianity, which the Sanghas believe that the entire advantages is being given to the Tamil sections, Tamil Hindus and the Christians during that time by the British. So after that, in the 19th century, a movement to revive the lost role of Buddhism had gained momentum. And we need to, in that we need to mention two important names. That is Anagarika Dharmapala. He gave a guideline to revive Buddhism in the country. And then Venerable Valapola Rahula, he wrote a book called The Heritage of Bhikkhu, and his works gave the social duties of the Sri Lanka to a very political meaning to those social duties. Slowly, the Buddhist texts were reinterpreted, and they gave a role to the Buddhist monks in society, and politics started to be rewritten. Later, in the 20th century, Sri Lanka was looking into the post-colonial side. So during that time, the clergy, they took the opportunity and they took active role in the social and the freedom movements of the country. And the common people looked up to them. So which played a major role in the future of the political influence that the Sanghas held. Then after gaining independence, the constitution made a clear separation between the religion and the state. The Buddhist Sangha, they hoped that after the British left, that they will revive the power, they will get the power back, and they will be able to play a huge role in the society back, but that did not happen. So slowly, the Sinhalese nationalism started to emerge in a much stronger way. They believed the religion was being threatened by the invaders, Muslims and Christians. The Sinhalese language and Buddhism became a powerful tool for the Sanghas to gain influence in society. Buddhists believe that they must protect the Buddhist way of life and Sinhalese culture, which are one entity. Monks have claimed that politicians were supposed to protect and promote Buddhism, since it is this land's religion and the national identity. The interpretation and notion of social service done by the Buddhist monks changed with passage of time. And the new reading covered a broad spectrum of advice and guidance in wholly secular activity, including political, understood as a right to make and unmake governments, to exert pressure on the elected representatives of the people. This is where the transformation began within the Sri Lankan Buddhism, which later emerged as political Buddhism. So now coming into the Buddhist monks' participation in politics. Active involvement of Buddhist monk in Sri Lankan politics is an individual capacity, has been there since the politicization of society under British rule. In fact, a Buddhist priest was a founder member of the Communist Party of Ceylon. Since 1950s, monastic involvement in politics has gradually become institutionalized. In 1956, the Eksath Bhikkhu Perumana, which is the United Buddhist Front, was a driving force in the successful electoral campaign of SWRD Badrinaike, who completely relied upon the social and the politically influential groups like the Buddhist Sanghas for reaching their message into the villages. Later, in 1978, there was a huge change that was brought in the constitution of Sri Lanka. A new article, the 9th article, was brought in. In that article, Article 9 says that the Republic of Sri Lanka shall give the Buddhism the foremost place, and accordingly it shall be the duty of the state to protect and foster the Buddhist Sasana, while assuring to all religions the right granted by Articles 10 and 14. Even though they did not say explicitly that Buddhism will be the main religion or the national religion of Sri Lanka, it was made clear by this article.
This is a continuation of 72 constitutions.
Yes, sir.
72 constitutions.
Yes, sir.
72 constitutions. 78 is repetition. Second sentence. It is 72 constitutions.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Sorry, confusing.
So after this change, Buddhism indeed became a de facto state religion in Sri Lanka. Now, coming into the present crisis. So in Sri Lanka, gradually after the independence, Sinhalese Buddhist extremism helped weaken the secular structure and paved way to the ethnic issues. The political parties used this to gain political advantage. Bhikkhus played a vital role in the Sinhalese nationalism. From an early time, Bhikkhus were advocating against any concessions given to other groups, especially Tamils. The 1972, many radical monks, like the leader of the Bodu Bala Sena, Ganasara Thero, propagated hate speech and incited riots against Muslims. It is very important to notice that the Bolu Bala Sena and Bodu Bala Sena and the Rajapaksa government had a very deep relationship in the sense he was given a presidential pardon and was made the head of the presidential task force on one country, one law formed after he was arrested and he had a case against him. Many instances show that the close relation between the Rajapaksa party and the hardline Buddhist Bodu Bala Sena in Sri Lanka, Buddhism has been weaponized for political purposes to promote a certain agenda. They sidelined with the most hardline monks and used them to instigate Sinhalese nationalism favors across the country to attain their agendas. We all know what is happening in Sri Lanka, the present economic and political crisis. The Buddhist Sangha have extended their full support to the Rajapaksa government from the time they came into power in Sri Lanka. The ethnic conflict that rampaged the country with participation of the monks in support of the government against the military attack for the Tamil community, the Buddhist monks acted as a staunch opposites even to the peace process that was offered by Sweden amidst the ethnic clashes. They provided unwavering support for the Rajapaksa clan on the war crime trials. The relationship between these two groups has been very strong. Even in 2020, after the Easter bombings, when the party came into power, the Sangha's support was vital. When Sri Lankan economy was failing and protests began in the first phase, a lack of presence from the clergy community could have been noticed. The economic and the political crisis in Sri Lanka brought together different factions of the society, religious ones especially. An observation can be made that the Buddhist monks' presence in the protest came much later, only after the protest started gaining momentum and force. Till then, they had continuously reaffirmed their trust in Gotabaya's presidency. The Buddhist establishment spoke up for Gotabaya, arguing that he was still the only leader that could save the country. As the economic situation turned from bad to worse, the common people who even supported the Buddhist clergy and Sinhalese nationalism went into the streets to protest against the government. The common people called out on the monks as being tools of the state and criticizing them for contributing to the current situation and maintaining the support for the political elite and for supporting violence and ethnic conflicts. It is during this time, with the fear of the common masses losing trust and legitimacy over the Buddhist clergy, that the monks came out against the government and announced a decree for them to resign and form an interim government. When observing the protest, one can take a major point. That is, the monks that are protesting on the streets are not the powerful Buddhist clergy that we know. Rather, they are the young and the less organized and progressive monks. For understanding the support that the monastic community gives, we need to understand that the monastic community in Sri Lanka is divided into three major bodies, if my understanding is right. The Shyam Nikaya, Amarapura sect, and the Ramanya sect. In these sects, the Shyam Nikaya is the most powerful sect with monks from the higher caste of the society. It was them who has always supported the Rajapakshas, and they are the same sect who came with an ultimatum for the government in the later stages. For a long time, the Mahasanghas were silent on this issue that was happening in Sri Lanka. Even now, the hardline Buddhist monk parties like the Bodhubala Sena, which the Rajapakshas have supported continuously, have not come up with any statement in support or against the Rajapaksha clan. It was only when the Sangha feared their diminishing power, they went against the government. This change can be viewed as a means of containing the political and economic fault lines that were brought out during this crisis. A government supported strongly by the Mahasanghas, such a huge national crisis could lead to the Buddhist monks losing their reverence and legitimacy in the society. The connection between monks and political figures has reportedly diminished the monks' respectability. With Rajapaksha resigning and the new interim government coming into place, Ranil Wickremesinghe as the president, it can be seen that the first speech that was given by him, he had reaffirmed his support for the Buddhist nationalist structure of the Sri Lankan state, noting that he was constitutionally bound to give Buddhism the foremost place and accordingly protect and foster Buddha Sasana. People hoped for a change in the social order in Sri Lanka, especially after the political and the economic crisis. Many Sri Lankans have come up with criticism on the new interim government that has been formed and led by Ranil Wickremesinghe, stating that they believe that the status quo would change and they hope to have a change in the society after the crisis. But this change will not happen due to the close relationship that is held by the president and the Buddhist Sangha. The political power is still being wielded, so this means that the political power will still be under the Buddhist monks. Many in Sri Lanka hope that the Sangha will not gain a position in the government but help out common people. So the Sri Lankan analyst, they believe that the root cause of the entire problem lies with the age-old Sinhala Buddhist nationalism, which has created nationwide social unrest. With the society facing social unrest and changes of other sectors of country, so coming to conclusion, the Buddhist Sanghas have their power have diminished over the years. And the common people, they believe that in the coming days, after the economic crisis is being over, that the Buddhist Sangha will reduce their power and there will be a reduction of the monks' presence in the parliament. So, yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sapna, for an outstanding presentation, informative, educative. Thanks. The session is over now. We're over to the question answers. Ma'am, could you please come over and sit? Yeah. Yeah, okay. The session would have been very interesting. The first one, I'll hand over to you, ma'am. The panelists will read out the questions. Can you take one? Yeah, you can please.
I'm just going to wear the shoes of Einstein's driver and say, if I'm not able to explain, I will ask scholars like Professor Anand and Commodore Vasan to explain. The question that is for me is, in your opinion, what is the threshold Sri Lanka has envisaged beyond which trade-off of strategic locations for debt restructuring will become unfeasible? Right. So, is there a threshold that they have? They already reached the threshold. Right. Imports have become a big challenge. When will they sell it out? Right. They're already trying to sell out their assets, but the problem is, do they have buyers for it? They don't have buyers as of now. The biggest buyer will come from China, of course, not from other country. But will Sri Lanka be able to sell those assets to China? We just need to wait and watch, which they don't want to do. Right? At least Ranil would not want to do. All said and done, Ranil is a pro-Western businessman. And selling assets to China continues to be a big question. He's not going to do that. But there's one point I think I missed it during my presentation. The central bank governor has said local debts they have been able to structure it well. They do have money now to import essential items. That includes oil. So from next week onwards, they'll be able to import oil without any problem. They're also hoping that end of maybe by September mid, they'll get the IMF loan. If IMF loan comes in, then they need not sell the assets. But the problem now is all three major institutions, the telecommunications, the Sri Lankan airlines, as well as the petroleum, they're all making huge losses. And whoever's going to buy, they also need to buy with those losses, which nobody is willing to do. All right? So if IMF money comes in, obviously they need not sell it at this point. But it is all with the hope that by September 15 they will get it. That's my take on it.
Thank you. Can I take all your questions?
Quite a few. First is that the question about the debt restructuring, the government has not, in fact, is in negotiation with its bilateral donors, because unless and until the main creditor, that is China and Japan, engage in a debt restructuring, it will be very, very difficult. Though rebuilding tourism, basically the stability has returned, and you must have seen in the table which I was showing in 2022, the tourism figure is going up. But if the fuel crisis is not resolved, though currently it is much better, then obviously the tourism sector will suffer. But I see the revival of the tourism sector after the new government has taken up. On the agricultural sector, even if there is not, the Sri Lanka is dependent on agricultural economy, but in terms of reviving it, obviously currently it is suffering from the crisis due to the fertilizer crisis. I think they are slowly limping back to normal. Then in terms of the inflation, I really do not see the food inflation reducing in short term, because I think 2 months back they had printed Sri Lankan notes, currency notes, even to pay to the government servants. So that I don't think in short term they will be able to address the inflation. But as other panelists also have said, that this is going to really have an impact. The difficulties for the people will grow, and I don't see in near future these difficulties coming down, because if the tax is increasing, fuel prices increasing, electricity prices increasing, all this will add to the inflation. So how do you control inflation when all these factors have gone up? In terms of expanding Sri Lankan economy to employ people, I really, most of the people are employed in the tourism sector. The service industry has not done much well. Sri Lanka has been extremely reluctant to sign the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which was negotiated. Of course, currently we are speaking of ECTA, the Economic and Technical Cooperation Agreement, which will see the expansion of service sector. I have not been able to understand, though Sri Lanka has agreed to be of the SAFTA, the South Asia, that opened up the service sector, they signed for it. But as far as India is concerned, they have not been very much interested. And we have seen what happened to the Apollo, which was taken over by a particular businessman in Sri Lanka. 1.5 lakh Sri Lankan getting employment opportunity in Middle East. I don't think they're going to replace the Indians, so we need not have to be concerned about that, because they have there are different sectors these people are working. So I really do not see that either they are replacing us or we are replacing them. And last was is industrial economical diversification. This Colombo port city, Hambantota port was at one point in time projected as big economic development projects, but we have seen what they have turned up. So therefore, I do not see any expansion at this moment. I think the moment is now to reform. Though people are speaking about the political reform, I don't see political reform and economic reform going hand in hand, because I don't see Ranil Wickremesinghe giving up the power, even if In 2015, they tried with the 19th Amendment. They on the 17th, from the 17th, the 19th was downgrade, and the 22nd is going to be worse. So I really don't see any end of executive presidency, which was supposed to have been introduced to deal with the Tamil crisis, Tamil political aspiration. The last one, because most of the questions are repeated, last one is that could we expect Bangladesh to walk down? I don't think so, because they are much better in their debt to GDP. There is a particular point beyond which the country may face crisis. Till now, they are in a very convenient position, though people are raising, after the Sri Lankan crisis, this is the question which is being raised not just in Bangladesh, but Nepal and Pakistan also. So there are fear, but the government has taken steps. There also you see the fuel crisis has been, the fuel price has been increased, electricity price has been increased, even artificially floated, they had tried to control the dollar price, as in Sri Lanka. So it was 80 something, I think last to last week it had touched more than 113 or something like that. Thank you.
The first question, so I'm combining two questions. The first question is on the Buddhist Sangha influence. How can India and China favor this for its geopolitical advantage? If you are, I missed to point out that China has been funding the Buddhist Sanghas for a period now. Even you know that China and India, we both are Buddhists. We have a Buddhist tradition, and India is the cradle of Buddhism. So China, they have been funded. There have been reports which says that during the last election, a huge chunk of fund was sent to a Buddhist monk. This news, there's no clarification, but it was a report that came out. And later, it is also mentioned that they had funded a Lotus Sutra in Colombo, which was a very huge, sutra, and it is believed that China has been doing this to gain influence over the Sanghas, so that they can have a political leverage in Sri Lanka, and their interest will be supported. India can have a good relation with Sri Lanka by getting in good connection with the Buddhist Sanghas. And India has been doing, our Prime Minister Modi, after Modi came to power, there have been we have many sites, the Buddhist influential sites, and by making sure that these sites are made into a pilgrimage center, we can influence the Buddhist Sanghas, if I'm not wrong, even though the Buddhism that is followed in India and Sri Lanka is different. So looking at the connection between Buddhist populist view in Sri Lanka and that of Myanmar, yes, they both follow the hardline, they both have sections of the hardline Buddhism. They both follow the Theravada Buddhism in Myanmar and Sri Lanka.
So from Sri Lanka, the Theravada form
It came first in Sri Lanka, and then in India. It was later taken to Burma by Sri Lankan monks. But after the revival, during the revival section, yes, again during the revival period from Myanmar, it was again brought back to Sri Lanka. The last question is regarding Theravada Buddhism being following the teachings of Gautama Buddha. Yes, whatever that is being followed in Sri Lanka by the Buddhists is, being part of the politics is against the teachings of Buddha, and there are huge, this is not my view, but these are the views, there's a huge debate and controversies that are happening in Sri Lanka and across Sri Lanka also. So the majority say that this is not the teaching of Gautama Buddha. So yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ashik, in the course of his presentation, the concluding part, mentioned 5 points for implementation by the new president of Sri Lanka. I would love to add another point also. Sri Lanka does not have a public distribution system. So they should introduce a public distribution system by which the food grains, lentils, kerosene, etc. could be distributed. What they're doing now is the divisional secretariat is distributing what we supply to them. And divisional secretariat is a branch of the central government. And they distribute. And a friend of mine sent an email to me last week saying that there's a queue to buy kerosene, and kerosene is sold at 250 Sri Lankan rupees per litre. The Sinhalese thugs buy these, buy in bulk from the shop and sell it at 2,500 rupees to those who are standing in the queue. So these could be avoided, these should be avoided, and these could be avoided only if Sri Lanka introduces a system where local acquisition and import should be in the hands of the center, whereas the distribution of it should be through the provinces. In other words, it will, suppose you, just as in India, you open a ration shop for 5,000 families, this will create a lot of jobs. And these jobs can be given to vulnerable sections like war widows, the refugees who have gone back, differently abled persons and all. And this will also give a stake to the provincial government to do this. This is something which India, along with the international community, should pressurize Sri Lanka. The other thing that I wanted to say that one of the disputes that India and Sri Lanka has is about our fishermen poaching deep into Sri Lankan waters and catching prawns. Since Sri Lanka is going to encourage export-oriented one, naturally prawns will be one of those which they will encourage. And this will further bring frictions between Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka, because this is one area where Tamil Nadu government is guilty of encouraging fishermen to go deep into Sri Lankan waters. Not only that, we are using equipment and all which are banned in Sri Lanka. Sapna, congratulations for your first presentation. But what I would love to make a couple of points for the improvement of this paper when it is published. In the beginning itself, you used a photograph of a group of monks standing in your title. I wish you had used Stanley Tambaya's title, the book title, Buddhism Betrayed, where there is a Buddhist monk who is shrieking and shouting. There is no karuna in his face. Karuna is the major teaching of Buddha, which means compassion. There is only raudra, anger, in his face. The Buddhism with the Sri Lankans believe in is very different from that of Buddhism that you and I have studied in the school. According to what we studied, Buddha mainly went round Aryavarta, the northern part of India. He never even came south. Whereas according to Mahamsa, Buddha visited Sri Lanka 3 times. When I asked a Sri Lankan scholar, we have not studied, after all Buddha was born here We have not studied that he went to Sri Lanka. Ashoka's son went, but not. Then he said, this is what we believe. And then I realized you should not question beliefs. So let them believe it, so let them believe it. But the Buddhism that they preach and practice is very different from what Buddha taught. They practice violence. In fact, there's a Buddhist monk who killed Debt Bandaranaike. So these things you should incorporate when you revise your paper.
Ladies and gentlemen, doctor is leaving now. She's got a flight. So thank everyone. Thank her from all our side. The full round of applause. Thank you so much, ma'am.
One thing I just want to make it. Ma'am mentioned about tourism. Today's newspaper carries that France and European Union, they have removed the advisory to its people from not going to Sri Lanka. So people from Sri Lanka, from France and European countries can visit Sri Lanka, which means their estimation is that, one of the experts' estimation is that by December, they will have this tourism industry in its full form. So with that, I think hopefully their economy will start. Chinese is a difference, but Chinese don't give you, no, the Chinese don't give you as much tip as the Europeans give you, sir. So that is more important.
Before the session gets over, I've just got one point to make. Chinese from ancient times play a game of Go. Go. Go is the name of the game that the Chinese play, whereas we played chess. The Go means basically surrounding the opponent's area and own area of interest ahead. So if you see the Chinese presence in Hambantota, Kyapayu, Gwadar, Djibouti, those locations may be, just very vulnerable to, any kind of a strike during any hostilities. But the fact is that they've covered their area of interest by surrounding their land. So that's the Chinese game of Go. That said, thank you everyone for, patiently listening to the panelists who made an outstanding presentation, and the question and answers was the icing on the cake. Thank you. My sincere thanks to Commodore Vasan sir, our mentor, Sri BSR sir, for giving me an opportunity to talk to this August gathering and also to chair a session. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commodore V. Venugopal, and Speaker of the panel for putting out such an informative session. Now we'll have a short tea break. Tea will be served in the adjoining hall. Will be resumed by 6 to 20 hours. See you soon. Thank you.